Welcome to Advent of Tessellations 2023. I'm Madonna Yoder, and I hope you will join hundreds of origami folders around the world in folding this daily challenge to increase your origami tessellation folding skills, so the twists and repeating patterns folded all from a single sheet of paper. Welcome to day one of Advent of Tess. I'm Madonna, I'm your instructor here, and we're going to start with this honeycomb weave tessellation, or mini tessellation, because we're doing a small chunk of it. And one thing that I want to emphasize in this series is that just because you start with a certain chunk doesn't mean that you have to make the same choices throughout the rest of the tessellation. So there's always multiple ways to finish a particular starting chunk, which means that even though this particular tessellation has been figured out by many independent designers and was around well before I came onto the tessellation scene, it's something that you can still make your own when you're folding with more repeats. So let's dive into it. I've got my 16 division triangle grid on a hexagon. I have my bone folder and two colors of pen. You can use a colored pencil like I have in the paper packs, or whatever other marking tools you desire. And we're going to start actually on the back side. And well, technically we're going to fold the whole thing from the back side. It may not look right now like there is a front or a back, but when I'm using a grid, I've made all of the valley folds on one side, and therefore they were all mountains on the other side. And I like to have the mountain side as the front of the piece, because you can see those grid lines better. Now you might have the opposite opinion. You might want to see the grid lines less. So I'm going to go to the valley side, the smoother side of the grid, and start from there. Now, one thing that I want to say right at the beginning is that if you're new to folding origami tessellations, don't try to make picture perfect pieces the first time. Use the pens. Don't worry about making marks on the paper. And consider having a spare grid on hand so you can make a second attempt if you need to. So, diving into our paper, the first thing I'm going to do is outline a 2 by 2 by 2, so 2 in all directions, hexagon right in the center. And notice as I'm going around, these mountain folds coming out to the edge of the paper are hitting right on the corners. So if we're going to mark, we're going to have the mountains coming in from the corners, and I'll just put a dot in the center there. They're stopping 2 spaces before the center and splitting to go around the middle of the paper. And so we are indeed starting with a hexagonal structure, even though we're only going to use triangle twists in this tessellation. So I'm going to be setting up the mountains, and then I'm going to make sure that I also have valley folds next to the mountains, and just to make sure that I'm doing the same way as in the crease pattern, which you can get on my website, or in the course format of Advent of Tess, which you can get all of that by going to training.gatheringfolds.com/advent. It'll be in the description of wherever you're watching, if you're not watching already on my website. And I'm going to arrange these valley folds one grid spacing away from the mountains. They're going to be above the mountain on the right-handed side, the right hand. And because it's rotational, that means it's below on the left. And I'm going to pinch the mountain folded over the valley on each of my 6 corners of the paper. And I'm going to walk the valley in and when I get to the point where my valley is walked in until 2 spaces away from this hexagon platform, it becomes a little bit difficult to walk in further. And what's going to happen, I'll zoom in on that. What's going to happen is that we're also going to get another valley 1 spacing away from the edge of the hexagon and parallel to the edge of the hexagon. So we're going to get that one, and then we can bring the next corner down, and then the next corner, and the next, and the next, all the way around. So this is very similar to how we would fold a closed hexagon twist, except that we're leaving the boundary of the hexagon 1 spacing further out, and we're not twisting all the way around. So now, well, once I'm sure that all of my valleys and mountains are on grid lines, I can use my boon folder to smooth everything down, and this just helps everything stay in place a little bit better. So let's take a look at the other side and see, now we have that hexagon hole in the center. Now it's time to make this 3 pleats going into a closed hole structure. So flipping back, I'm going to take a look at what's going on here, and I see in each corner we have this 3-way intersection. So we have those 2 mountains around the hexagon and then the mountain coming out of the corner. And I want to go 2 spaces from that initial 3-way intersection. So 2 spaces out along the mountain, and this is going to zigzag out and back. And at that point, I want to split my mountain into a 3-way intersection. So I'm opening the pleat so I can run 2 more directions of grid lines out. And this intersection, instead of laying it down flat, like we would if we were doing like the spread hexagons tessellation, I'm going to let it twist around, and I'm going to follow the lead of that first pleat, leave that laying down, then the second one lays down left-handedly, and the third one is going to come back in here. Now this zigzag is going to want to lift a little, and we're going to let it. So we could keep it flat in and then squash on top. This is making a closed triangle twist, or we can let the flap lift a little. So we're squashing, and notice how I'm pushing down 1 spacing out from the center of the twist in each of the 3 corners, and let that squash down on a nice flat surface with nothing underneath it, and then lay the corner of the central hexagon back on top. So if you look at the crease pattern download, again, training.gatheringfolds.com/advent to get into the area where I have those downloads, then you'll see that we have made the choices for the tessellation already, at least for this mini segment. And those choices are, we have these three-way intersections that are laying flat, and we have these triangles, and there's a fixed distance between them. And then we can generalize from that to the entire tessellation, or there are ways to make different choices, particularly with the spacing of these hexagon edges later on. So from there, what I want to do is take a look at these two pairs of parallel pleats, and I'm going to have to choose, am I going down around this way or up around this way? And for this particular tessellation, for this particular extent of the tessellation, it's not really going to make much difference. So I'm going to arbitrarily choose the two that are further apart from each other. I'm going to start with the one that's familiar because it's coming from that central hexagonal structure. And 2 spaces along the mountain from the corner of the hexagon will be the center of my new closed triangle twist. So I'm bringing up that 3-way intersection. Notice that what was the mountain before, that's after that point, gets popped down, and we don't even use anything in that grid direction. And we can then squash that new triangle twist, lifting up flaps as needed to smooth things out. And then we can take this area where the 2 pleats from these 2 triangle twists are overlapping and open it up. And we know from looking at these triangles. So one thing that I'll say about this mini version of this tessellation is that we're going to have the same relationship between these big hexagon corners and the triangles on all 6 corners of the hexagon and all 3 corners of the triangles. Same relationship. So that means that the corner of the hexagon is going to be 1 spacing away from the corner of the triangle. And so coming over here, 1 spacing from the corner of the triangle, I need to have a corner of a hexagon, and likewise from this corner of our first triangle there, I need another corner of the hexagon. And those corners of the hexagons are going to lay down on top of the centers of the triangles that they're next to. So what we've just done is make one of these little bubbles, as it were, in the final piece. And we can continue going around in exactly the same way. So I'm taking the wider spaced pair of parallel pleats. So we've got parallel pleats on the right, parallel pleats on the left. I'm taking the pair that's spaced wider apart. The top pleat needs a closed triangle twist, and specifically that's going to be 2 spaces from the corner of the hexagon structure. And notice it's 2 spaces from the corner of the hexagon to the center of the triangle, but only 1 space from the corner of the triangle to the center of the hexagon. So I did that one rather quickly, but you have 2 prior examples to go back to. And then we have these pleats overlapping and 1 spacing from the corner of each of these closed triangles. We will have a 3-way intersection that is a corner of the big hexagon. Now, one thing that I see a lot of people try to do is finish a whole structure as soon as they see it start to come into being. So in this situation, that would be finishing these outer hexagons all the way around. But what I want to caution you as you fold more repeats of these patterns is to do only the minimum of a ring around the center until you get all the way around, and then you can add a little bit more. It's like layers of accretion, so like a stalactite or stalagmite forming, or tree rings, or making a pearl in an oyster. These are all these processes where you're adding thin shells around a core. And then we'll repeat again. So moving to the next set of parallel pleats, the top one needs that closed triangle twist right there. And we're going to then have those three-way intersections, one space from each of those two most recent triangles, and lay it down on top. Then rotate and repeat, starting with that top pleat. And get the triangle, then set up these two new three-way intersections and laying them down on top. And rotate, and this time there's not just two parallel pleats, there's three. So what are we going to do? Well, I'll start the same way by setting up the triangle, and this time it's the middle pleat instead of the top pleat, but it's the familiar triangle setup. And there's a pleat overlap on top and a pleat overlap on the bottom. Now, the way we've been going around, these pleat overlaps on the bottom are easier to open up. And so we can go and open that structure pretty easily. But this ordering of the pleats with this pleat overlap is less friendly. And so you'll hear me talk a lot further on about friendly and unfriendly pleat overlaps. And that refers to the order in which the pleats are folded and whether you have to kind of pop out and risk tearing the paper on your paper on whichever side you're going to be working on. And one thing I'll note here is that a friendly pleat overlap on one side is unfriendly on the other side. And so here we have this lovely honeycomb weave structure. And if you want to create spacing variations, if you're going and using this on a bigger grid, this particular pattern is going to work really well on a diagonal grid on a hexagon. And you'll get like perfect borders, no jumping in and out. And you might wonder, how do I know this? Well, this pattern is exactly the same pleat structure actually as two other patterns that I'm familiar with. So the first of those is if we were to, well, technically three, because spread hexagons has the same pleat pattern. We can, if we so choose, go and make every single one of these, well, we can do a variety of things with it. We can make every single one of these three-way intersections into twists, which is going to mean reversing half of the already made twists. Or we could make these central hexagon structures into closed hexagon twists. So this is the exact same arrangement of plates, arrangement of hexagons and triangles as we're going to see in day 6. So I've got this hexagon in the middle with these triangles with their corners touching. This is exactly the same as day 6. So there's a lot of options when it comes to modifications of this pattern. And even going beyond that, a more decorative modification would be to take each of the edges of this big hexagon and bring them into this star shape, which kind of puffs up the point and makes more of a flower. You can choose to do that everywhere or just on some of them and create another variation that way. So there's lots going on. And then as far as spacing variations, you can change spacing in particular lines, and these would be lines that cross these bars perpendicularly. So we've got 1, 2, 3 directions where we can change the spacing. And Ekaterina Lukasheva has a nice paper published in the Bridges Conference about all of the ways to change the spacing in this type of pattern. So there's all kinds of different options when, even when we've made this many choices. If we have more grid, there's so many more options. So happy folding, and I'll see you tomorrow for day 2.